Elaine, I'm in gallery.
Okay, if the person who is watching you is on speaker view, they like when I'm looking at you right now, you fill up almost my whole screen.
Okay,
So
perfect. Thank you.
that's I'm glad you mentioned that because those in the audience, if you put it on speaker view, then you will see Eileen large on your screen. If you have it in gallery view, everybody's like a little postage stamp. So I'm glad you mentioned that, but I can see you very clearly because I have you on speaker view. Thank you.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak about suicide prevention. This past year has been a struggle. We've all been challenged emotionally, mentally, and physically, and spiritually. This has been a year of loss on so many levels. But we've learned how much we need each other when life has been turned upside down. My hope is this brief presentation will give you information and confidence to help someone struggling with suicidal thoughts. Suicide's not a health issue. It's not an education issue. It's an everybody issue. Most people are in the dark about suicide. It's time to bring it out of the shadows. It's the 10th leading cause of death in the US, and yet it's the most preventable death. So let's explore preventable. How can we make a difference? What's interesting is those individuals who most need help in a suicidal crisis are the least likely to ask for help. The person most likely to prevent a person of dying by suicide is someone they already know. That's you or me. A suicidal person is struggling with despair, intense emotional pain, and hopelessness. A pain we can't see, but it is deep, deep, and dark. First, it's important to know the warning signs for suicide. Sometimes we confuse risk factors and warning signs. So risk factors are those things that happen to a person, while warning signs are what a person says or does. So I'm just going to give a medical example because it seems to be an issue for some people to understand it. So risk factors in, say, a heart attack can be high blood pressure, high cholesterol, smoking, a family history of heart disease. So these risk factors can put someone at a higher risk for a heart attack at some time in the future. Warning signs of a heart attack, shortness of breath, nausea, chest pain, are indications someone is having a heart attack right now. That person needs immediate help. I want you to understand the warning signs of suicide because that person needs immediate help. So that's what we're going to focus on at first. Those in crisis are likely to send warning signs of their distress and suicidal intent. Importantly, learn the warning signs of suicide so you can take quick, competent action and save lives. There's a risk factor of suicide that's also a warning sign that's important to mention, and it's depression. Most suicidal people are depressed. Wishing to be dead is a frequent symptom of untreated depression. So I'd like to go through the warning signs. Sometimes there are direct verbal clues. I've decided to kill myself. I wish I were dead. I'm just going to end it all. If such and such doesn't happen, I'll kill myself. Such and such could be if I don't get this job, if she doesn't marry me, if I don't graduate. Then there are also indirect verbal clues, sometimes harder to catch. I'm tired of life. I just can't go on. I think my family would be better off if I were dead. Actually, who cares if I'm dead? You know, pretty soon you won't have to worry about me. You're going to regret how you treated me. And then there are behavioral clues. A previous attempt, acquiring a gun, stockpiling pills, depression, moodiness, or hopelessness, putting personal affairs in order, giving away money or prized possessions, sudden interest or disinterest in religion, drug or alcohol abuse, or a relapse after a period of recovery. That's that internal feeling of another failure. Unexplained anger or irritability, withdrawing from friends and family. That's a huge warning sign. Noticeable changes in behavior. Then there are situational clues. Being fired or expelled from school, a recent unwanted move, missing friends, or maybe having to move into a nursing home, loss of any major relationship, death of a spouse, child, best friend, especially by suicide or murder. Incarceration, fear of punishment, anticipated loss of financial security, fears of becoming a burden to others, diagnosis of a terminal illness. Maybe you recognize several of these warning signs in someone. You've already been wondering if this person is suicidal, but at the same time, second guessing yourself. The very idea someone wants to die is frightening. And a natural reaction is fear, which leads to denial. You may even try to convince yourself you didn't actually hear what you heard. Some old myths may pop into your head. Only professionals can help a suicidal person. You know, people who talk about suicide won't actually do it. And if a person wants to commit suicide, there is no way to stop them. These are myths. But the truth is, and the facts are, suicide prevention is everybody's business. Almost everyone who attempts or completes talks about it beforehand. Don't ignore suicide threats. Most suicidal people don't want to end their life. They want to end pain. So what can we do to save a life? QPR has been designed to save a life. It's much like CPR or the Heimlich maneuver. It's easily learned, and the application of PQR may save a life. It is 3 life-saving skills, just 3. Q, question a person about suicide. P, persuade the person to get help. R, refer the person to the appropriate resource. QPR is intended to offer immediate hope through positive action. It is something that anyone can learn. The suicidal person has lost hope. Be that hope. Be the person who offers that hope. So step 1, ask the question, save a life. The question is the suicide question. So a few tips. Plan a time and a space to ask the question. Try to get the person alone so you have some privacy. Set aside some time for a good conversation, maybe about an hour. Be present. Please turn off your cell phone. Put the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline number in your phone, and that's on the resource page that you've been given. It'll be at your fingertips when you need it. So there are a couple of approaches to asking the suicide question. There's a less direct approach and a more direct approach. So in the less direct approach, these might be some of the words you use. Have you been very unhappy lately? Have you been so very unhappy that you're wishing you were dead? You know, if somebody was as upset as you seem to be and they wish they were dead, I'm wondering if you're feeling that same way. The more direct approach, have you ever wanted to stop living? Are you thinking of killing yourself? Are you thinking of suicide? These are new skills for a lot of people, and you can be really uncomfortable using them. So it's important to practice. If we were in person, I would ask you to turn to the person next to you and ask, are you thinking of killing yourself? It's uncomfortable. We don't want to really think about it. And yet it's the most important question we can ask to save a life. And these are just examples. So maybe you use the words that fit for you. Don't try to use somebody else's words. And so the person has said yes to the suicide question. What do you do? You know, once you put the question out, it's on the table for discussion. If someone says yes, this is a good thing. Your anxiety may go up, but research tells us once this question is asked, almost every person can feel relief, not distress. Anxiety decreases while hope increases. That's what we want. It's almost as if by asking the suicide question, we provide a ray of light where there's been utter darkness. The next step is to persuade the person not to end his or her life and to get help. Will you let me help you get help? It begins with listening. Once you've asked the suicide question, most people thinking of suicide want to talk. They want you to know what they've been going through. So be a good listener. Give your full attention. Don't interrupt. Don't give advice. And don't judge. It's okay to ask if the person has a plan. The more detailed the plan, the more imminent the suicide. Persuasion works best when you do the following. Persist in statements that suicide is not a good solution and suggest that other better alternatives can be found. And you know, suicide's not the problem. It's only the solution this suicidal person has chosen to a perceived improbable problem. So you don't want to focus on that. The focus should be on solutions. And you're going to end up doing a lot of nodding and agreeing to get that person to open up more and more and maybe think of some of their own solutions. Just offer hope in any way you can. And maybe even if you can't think, maybe you're just too nervous. Just tell the person in different ways you don't want him or her to die. I don't want you to die. I want you to get help. I'm here for you. The goal of persuasion is simple. You want the person to say yes, that they will get some help. Will you go with me to see a counselor, a priest, a minister, a tribal elder, any kind of a professional person they're willing to see? Will you let me help you make an appointment with whomever? Will you promise me? You know, sometimes suicidal people will agree to get help, but then not get it. The more hopeless and helpless they feel, the more difficult it may be for them to get help. Then ask them to agree to go on living. I want you to live. Will you please stay alive until we can get you some help? You know, more often than not, this promise is met with relief and an agreement to stay alive. You know, sometimes a person will continue to refuse help. and you're really not sure to do or what to do. So you're going to pull out your phone and call that number, the suicide prevention number, to get support and advice. The last step is refer someone for help. Remember, you're not the therapist or the physician. You don't have the answers. You're the person who is with them and providing hope and helping them come up with a different solution. So here's some general guidelines. The best referral is when you can personally take the person you're worried about to a mental health provider or other appropriate professional. The next best referral is when the person agrees to see a professional and you know that they've kept the appointment. The third best referral is getting the person to accept help, even in the future. Now, QPR is 3 skills. Number 1, ask if the person is thinking of suicide. 2, persuade the person to agree to get help. 3, refer the person to the appropriate professional. And remember, before you start QPR, you can always call that hotline number to get support, advice, and calm your anxiety. There are some additional thoughts. Broaden your safety net. Now, after QPR, ask the person, who else would you like me to let know you're feeling this bad? And then ask permission to contact this person or these people. Be sure to follow up with a text, a phone call, whatever works for you. And QPR training is available online. You can go for a 1-hour course. This is so brief. You're not getting as much information as if you go online. But what this has done is giving you some familiarity with QPR. And each time you learn about it, you'll learn more and be more comfortable and be comfortable answering or asking the question. Alcohol makes depression worse. It impairs thinking and judgment, increases impulsivity, and can contribute to suicide. There's no safety without sobriety. And any sudden happiness in someone who has been depressed for a long time should alert you to the fact that that person probably needs QPR. Has this person decided to die by suicide and is relieved at finally making the decision? And they may come across as chipper or relieved. Think about when you've been struggling with the decision and when you finally make it, there's relief. Stigma of mental health illness is such a barrier to seeking help and shames one into silence. And stigma is just another whole Zoom program that we really need to expose the stigma for what it is, because it's so destructive. Reduce the risk by making suicide difficult by removing firearms, car keys, medications, and other means one might use to complete suicide. Simply restricting access to the means of suicide may buy time, time for the pain to pass, for a solution to be found, and for hope to be rekindled. Please learn more about suicide and suicide prevention, because hope begins with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Janine. That was such a wonderful presentation on such a sensitive and important topic. It helps us to feel more confident that we really can make a difference. Thank you. The next part of our program will include a set of prepared questions presented by the panel. Eileen will then comment on these questions. The first question: what are some of the ways to support a family or individuals who have lost a loved one to suicide?
So thank you, Nancy. This is something I had written for my clients and it had passed out really quite a few years ago, and I think it's still appropriate. We often don't know what to say or what to do after a suicide, and people are left alone when they really need support. So these are just some suggestions. And I'm not going to go through the whole list. It takes too much time, but you're there to be a support, to walk alongside the person. And there aren't really any answers. It's a grief process, and you get to just be there for the person. And so when I did suicide presentations in schools, a woman who presented with me was a survivor of a suicide. And I mentioned that a survivor is someone who has survived the loss of a loved one by suicide. Her son had died by suicide. And the most important thing for her after he died, she had a friend who walked with her every day. She said, I don't remember a thing she said, but I remember is she was with me and she walked with me. And that's just something wonderful we can do for each other. And under what questions are appropriate, I had added into this that I didn't have before, that sometimes after a suicide, a person can become suicidal. They're just so distraught over this death. And so if you have any indication that the person you're walking with or caring about is suicidal, it's really important to go ahead and do the QPR with them so that that person can get the help he or she needs. Another piece, talk about the person who died. Ask for memories and remember their holidays if you can, birthdays. Be patient. There's no timeline for grief. It's a process. And I hope that these statements will help you when you want to help somebody.
Thank you, Eileen. The next question: if we were to ask someone who is struggling about suicide, will this in turn put the idea into their head?
Absolutely not true. Talking about suicide provides the opportunity to communicate. Sharing concerns and fears can bring relief. Relief can bring hope, and hope keeps people from giving in to despair.
The next question: what should we do if someone is posting suicide threats or suicidal comments on social media?
Yeah, that seems to be more common nowadays. So I'm glad you asked that question. You know, whether the post is made by a family member, a friend, or a stranger, always take the post seriously. Respond with kindness and compassion. And if you realize the person needs more than a supportive response, call or get in the car and go see the person. Maybe you don't know that person, they don't live nearby, you don't really have a lot of helpful information other than what was posted on social media. Then it's more difficult to be helpful. One of the things you can do is take the time to find out what you can do to be prepared. And again, you pull out your phone and you call that contact number, and a trained crisis worker can help you develop the next steps based on the individual situation. And then I also have on the resource a place to go for social media platforms to get information on what they suggest and what they do for suicidal ideation, thoughts of suicide. that people expound on when they're on social media.
Eileen, I've noticed that in the press and the medical community, they are now saying someone died by suicide rather than committed suicide. Could you comment on this?
You know, committed is the word used for a crime. Death by suicide isn't a crime. It's a health issue. And the most suicidal people don't want to die. They want their pain to end. That's just so important to remember. They're in a state of hopelessness and despair. And in the moment, they don't realize that the impulse to want to die doesn't last forever. So died by suicide is respectful. And think of the family who's lost someone through suicide. You know, it's a much more respectful way to talk about suicide when someone's dealing with such a painful loss.
Eileen, do people ever threaten suicide to get attention?
Again, don't dismiss a suicide attempt as simply being an attention-getting device. This person needs support and understanding to learn healthy coping skills when distressed. You know, what can look like attention getting may actually be a cry or a plea for help. Take all threats seriously.
Thank you, Eileen.
Yes.
Do you have some information about resources?
Mhm. So everybody, I think, has gotten that, and it's pretty self-explanatory. So I don't think I really have anything to add. And I can't remember, did I mention that you can get QPR? I think I did. You can get QPR online. If you do have a question on this resource, you can ask it in the chat. So let me look at the chat and see what people have to say. Let's see. I don't have any questions yet. I'll give you a minute or two to ask some questions. This is a really difficult topic. And I thank everybody who has come, because we're the ones who can make a difference. You know, people don't usually go to a health professional if they're feeling suicidal. They usually go to a friend, or a friend notices that, you know, something's off. I need to check on this person. And so the more that we know, the more we can make a difference, because we really are on the front line. We really are the CPR, which is QPR, for people with suicidal thoughts and just struggling and not knowing what to do. And I think it's really, really hard to just know what to do and give yourself a break. We learn as we go along, right? Someone asked, is it appropriate to bring someone to the ER? And I think that, yes, if that's what you need to do that. I do know someone who had a relative who was suicidal several times, and she didn't know what to do, so she brought the relative to the ER and go from there. Let's see. you mentioned risk factors. Do risk factors run in a family? What are risk factors? So when I first decided to do this presentation, I was thinking about there are so many risk factors, and they're not really as important as the warning signs. And so when you're thinking, I wonder if somebody is suicidal, maybe some of those risk factors will play in. Like, you know, that there's a family that has depression, that a lot of family members have depression, and this person has it. So that might give you a little more information. But if it's imminent suicide, you're really focused on the warning signs, what's going on right here and now. And that's what you want to take care of, because you want that person to move from only thinking about dying because there's no other way out to thinking, well, yes, there is another way out because this person's here helping me. Let's see. Are there any demographics that are more prone to suicide than others? Yes. The LGBTQ community. So that's why I put it on there. Any person of color, because we have so much racial discrimination. And actually, that would be a risk factor. This being devalued for the color of your skin. And it causes a lot of depression, a lot of anxiety, a lot of angst, because often there's not much a person can do other than take it or get upset. I think people who are bullied are at greater risk. And sometimes people just don't have coping skills, healthy coping skills. And so it's really important that we teach our children healthy coping skills. Sorry, mumble mouth here. I hope that answers that question. Anybody else? We got more time. I think I must have talked too fast. So go for it. Let's see. Since we have time, add what you wish you would have put in your presentation. Okay. I think I would have liked to talk more about stigma, because it's so prevalent, it's so demeaning, and it silences people. Stigma is words like, we've heard, if you're mentally ill, you're crazy. Well, that's not true. We know that. People are in a state of high anxiety, and when we're in a state of high anxiety, it's really hard to think and to think clearly. But if you think, well, people are going to think I'm crazy, you're not going to get the help you need. If you look at the media and movies and television shows, people are portrayed as crazy. And that again sends a message. And the message is always, don't tell anybody, because you'll be made fun of. And there's this sense of shame that really is so terrible, really. And then there are messages that I think promote stigma. Well, just buck it up. It's not that bad. All these negative comments that can be said that. Keep people from getting the help they need. So I think stigma is a big, big piece. And the other thing, I think it's hard when there's no audience interaction. Yeah, so this is my first time doing this on Zoom. I would ask audience questions sometimes and get some feedback from people to know what they're thinking. And it's really nice to look at people when you're talking to them, because sometimes a look can tell you, I need to expand on this or that more. Let's see, are there other myths?
Elaine and Eileen, I'm seeing 10 chats waiting.
Okay. Let's see, one is, are there other myths about suicide? There are. I think we covered most of them, because I had mentioned some when a person's afraid to ask the suicide question. What are the assumptions of privacy if you want to voice concerns to a third party and seeking advice about potential suicidal person? Well, as long as you're not naming the person, you're not giving personal information about the person, but you're asking, if this happens with somebody, what can I say? What can I do? So I don't really think there is an issue with privacy unless you give a person's full name. Let's see. I don't know, maybe. Do the elderly complete suicide at a higher rate? Males age 45 to 65 have the highest suicide rate. And then then 65 to I think 85 is also a high rate. And so that's the highest rate for suicide. And teens have a very high rate for suicide. Oh, somebody said we didn't think you went too fast, so thank you for that. And do elderly commit? Do you mean complete suicide? I'm not sure what the question is. Let's see. There are a couple of questions on the elderly. Did I answer them? Okay, well, 2 new messages. Let's see. If the person you're talking to is not a family member or friend, when do you stay with them and when do you feel you can leave? I think, I'm not real sure how you would know this person is suicidal. You might have to give me more information. But if you know someone is suicidal, you don't want to leave them alone. You want to have, if you have to leave, to have some kind of support for that person and get them connected with somebody else. So let me know if that answers your question. Oh. Are suicides more likely to be carefully planned or impulsive? They are more likely to be impulsive. I think sometimes I call something that's happened a tipping point. They're struggling, and then something happens, and that's the tipping point. I can't do this anymore. I'm just done with life. So what might be a tipping point? I think something really tragic, actually anything could be, but what pops into my head, we've had these mass shootings in Colorado. And I think that this last one will be a tipping point for someone. You know, we think we've been in COVID, we've been in isolation, we've, like I said, our world's been turned upside down. And now we have this mass shooting. It's going to be really hard for people to deal with that. It is hard. And so we get to be even more vigilant in watching out for each other. Are there any professions or occupations that are more at risk for suicide? Yes. Cops, firefighters, any kind of first responder. They see a lot of horrific things, and they have to be there for people. So how do they decompress? How do they deal with it? And I think it's getting better and better and better that there's processing afterwards, there's help for people. And again, so for example, there are more males in these professions. And if they have that stigma just bucket up, they're not going to get the help they need. So that it's funny how things play together, isn't it? Yeah. Someone has a question on planning, but I don't know what it is. Oh, I'll tell you something else I would talk more about is gun safety. People struggle with, you know, I'm not taking my guns out of my home. It's a Second Amendment right. And there's this confusion. It's not about your guns. Nobody is faulting you for having guns. It's a safety issue. Right now in this moment or this period of time, someone in your household is considering suicide. You want to do everything you can to keep that person safe. And if that means having your guns out of your home for a short period of time, locking them, taking the bolt out of a gun or a rifle so it's not usable, then do it. And there can be a real disconnect there for people, thinking that, well, you just don't like guns. Let's see. It seems that PTSD is a huge factor in suicide. ICU nurses have had a hard time. And actually so I should have mentioned military, I should have mentioned nurses and doctors, professions that at least right now in the health field can put people more at risk for suicide. There's a lot of help for PTSD. There's EMDR, which is very helpful. It's a really difficult struggle with PTSD. And yes, it is a huge factor in suicide. It's really important to get ongoing help, to have help beyond the professional, but to have support systems. And I think that these days we're much better at creating support systems for different groups of people to help them. And I think, like with the veterans, you know, you can press one, wounded warriors, there are so many things to help. EMDR, let's see, EMDR and how does it help? It's eye desensitization movement. And it, in a nutshell, it helps release trauma. And it can be extremely effective. You have to be trained to do it. And I was trained, and it's been a long time ago now, but some people, that's all they do is EMDR. They're really focused on that, but it definitely is helpful. And if somebody's struggling with any kind of trauma, it can be extremely helpful. Do schools educate on suicide? I think not enough schools. When I started doing this, I was part of a volunteer group through the health department to go into schools in our county and talk to ninth graders so that they got the suicide prevention speech and how to help. And what we did with them, we didn't call it QPR, we called it ACT, ACT, acknowledge, care, and tell. Because you want kids to tell a safe adult so that adult can take over and help the suicidal person. It's not up to children to help, but it is up to children to tell. So one of the things we talked about is telling, because a lot of times kids are sworn to secrecy, and we tell them, your friend can be mad at you and your friend gets over that, but if your friend dies, they don't get over that. So it's always, always okay to tell. I hope there, and I really don't know right now how much is done in the schools. I thought that was a good program, but then we lost our funding and we don't have it back. I hope that teachers, when we're in college going to school to teach, that we have more information on teaching resilience, understanding the warning signs of suicide, and what the teacher can do to be helpful. There are so many different things we can do. I think even in our churches, to have more programs. The more people are educated, the bigger the difference is, and the more we can be helpful. We don't want suicide. We don't need suicide. We should have zero suicide. And it takes everybody to make that happen. I think I'm getting hoarse. And Jim looks like he's talking, but he's muted.
Sorry. I'm Jim Martell. I'm president of the Lake Vermilion Cultural Center, and I want to thank Eileen Rice, our speaker, for an almost exhaustive talk on this, but I did learn about QPR, which I had never heard of before. I also want to thank Nancy Eichholz on this. Personally, I've had 2 colleagues over the years that have committed suicide, and it was very hard to predict those. And I was amazed at how much planning went into it. Very serious. Okay. But anyway, thank you very much. It was a very good program. We are making a recording of it. It'll be on the website. Just want to refer everybody to our website. We do seek donations for this sort of material and to help in our building program. And otherwise, everybody have a good Sunday. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.